Okay, I'm ditching that mic. We are sticking with the laptop mic, so that is what we got. I'm baffled. I've no idea. If anyone knows anything about this stuff and why I've got no audio on my really high quality professional mic, tell me. We are now running off the laptop mic and I'm just going to leave it like that. So I hope you can hear me loud and clear. We'll continue. Let's continue with the hellos. Hello from the Netherlands, Raina Kirsten Photography. Hello everybody, wherever you are. From Scotland, Alan Stewart. Thank you very much. I know I've got no audio. You're a bit behind me, but we should have audio now. Yes, here comes a thumbs up. Thank you very much. Let's start now. Hello and welcome to another live Ask Elvis. Apologies for the audio. I don't know what it is. No idea. But there we go. Right, thank you very much for joining again. Tonight, as the title of the video suggests, we're going to start off by talking about the whole reverse grid idea because it's hot topic right now. There are actually quite a few hot topics right now, so I'm sure we'll get through a few of them. But we'll start off with that one in a moment. Hello to all of you joining. Hello from Germany, Jonas Wilken. Hello from Hull, Terra Weston, sorry. Hello from Gloucester, Falmouth, Ohio, USA, Cameron Rowell. Canada, from Steve Amiot. Hello there. Hey from Yorkshire, Mighty Kane. Australia, all the way down Australia. Thank you so much. God knows what time it is for you, but thank you very much for coming to say hello. I appreciate it. Right, let's get things going. We're going to start off with this question. Of course, it's right across the news, isn't it, this weekend? Big talking point that the teams are now discussing. It's been proposed to them that we may have reverse grids. There were loads of questions on it, but I'm going to use this one to prompt the first part of this discussion. It's from Russ Gregory 11 on Twitter. He says, where do you sit on this reverse grid idea? Apparently Toto's the only one opposed to this. I'm a Lewis and Marc fan and understand Toto's position on this, but I think it should be given a go. Also, never been to an F1 event. What's the best GP to go to on a budget in Europe? Right, well, whilst I'm going to wrap it on quickly about reverse grids, those of you who have travelled to European Formula One Grand Prix on a budget, perhaps you can help Russ Gregory here with some advice on that, because that's one area that I'm not really sure I can help on. Not ever having travelled as a sort of paying punter to races, that's one side of the whole Formula One circus that I have no real experience on. I can offer advice on some great cities that we race in, but doing it on a budget, which are the best value for money tickets, which are the best value for money places to go and eat out and get flights to, and those kind of things. I've been in this very privileged position all my Formula One career where someone else has taken care of all of that. So anyone who has experience on that, see if you can help out Russ on that one. But let's talk about reverse grids. So first of all, and a lot of people seem to still be a little bit confused on what the idea is, because this is not talking about going through qualifying and then reversing the grid for the race. A lot of people saying, why wouldn't people just go slowly in qualifying to get a better race grid position? It's not how they're proposing this works. The way this is proposed to work is that on the races where we have two races at the same venue, like Austria, where we kick off the season, for example, rather than run two races exactly the same where we're highly likely to get a very similar type of result, very similar type of spectacle, for the second of those events at that circuit, they're proposing that on the Saturday, we do a sprint race. So instead of qualifying, instead of the traditional formats that we have right now, they would do a sprint race, a short race with all the Formula One cars and drivers, and the result of that race would be then reversed to form the grid for Sunday's afternoon's full Grand Prix. That's the idea. They haven't worked out the finer details of it yet, but that proposal has been put to teams. And I don't think it's just Merg. I believe that Racing Point are also sitting with Mercedes in currently opposing the idea. And what they've been told at the moment is they're going to go away, think about it over the weekend and over the next few days, and come back with the way they think they would vote on this. Because, of course, there's a huge lot of work to go into this if they decide it's going to happen. There's a whole set of regulations have got to be written up, if nothing else. And that's a huge amount of work in itself. So let's talk about, is it a good idea or not? Now, I've spoken quite a lot about my opinions on reverse grids. Not this kind of reverse grid was the thing that I proposed in a video a while back. If you remember, I talked about doing qualifying pretty much as it is now, but offering points for that qualifying session. So you have to go for it, full points, got to go for it to get pole position, but then reversing the grid for Sunday and have the fastest car start at the back. I've got a poll that I've been running on YouTube, which has got some really interesting results, which I'll show you in a moment. But there's a real split amongst the basic theory of whether Formula One should even be talking about this kind of thing. Does it go against, Formula One's heritage? Well, yeah, it does go right against their heritage, because this is not how Formula One has ever worked before. But does that mean that we should never be trying anything like this? The question I asked in the poll was, should we be trying this, given that we've got this weird season of 2020? It's perhaps an opportunity to do something like this, an experiment. And lots of you in the comments to that said, well, that's fine, it is an opportunity to do that, but if we experiment, we still need to have a basic idea of whether we think Formula One should fundamentally be going in that direction. Because even if it offers some great spectacle, does it go against the ethos and the history of Formula One? And that's the question, really, that there's no right or wrong answer to. Yes, it goes against all tradition, it goes against all history, but should we be solely reliant on going off what history has told us before? Should we not be open to new ideas? And is 2020 not a perfect opportunity to try those new ideas when we've got a mixed up season anyway? Those are my thoughts. My thoughts are that it's a decent opportunity to try this, so I think why not? Because otherwise, if we don't try something different, we will get two very similar Grand Prix just a few days apart. That's the first thing. And why not give it a try? Test it at a couple of races where we have back-to-back events and see what we get. I want to know your thoughts on this. I'll take a look at the comments on this, and then we'll go to the poll, which has, as I say, some quite interesting theories on that. There we go. Steve Amiot says, yeah, Darwin has a theory about that. Absolutely. Try and you go over the same process over and over again, and you will likely get the same result. If you never try something new, you'll never know if it's a good idea, says Carola Rue. Absolutely. That's exactly the way I think of this. And what if we do like it? Then we have a bigger question of whether we want to implement it or not, or whether we want to tweak it further, or whether we want to make it a permanent fixture, or perhaps just a special one-off. Those are things that we've never done in Formula One before, but why should we not be thinking along those kind of lines? Chris A, if it goes into sprint races to decide the places for qualifying, then just have it so the first teams to leave the pits get on the grid. First come, first served. I mean, look, I think the idea of all of this is not just to change the way we serve up the grid, is it? It's not just about getting a mixed up grid. That's one benefit of doing this, is that we may have, and likely will have, the faster cars at the back of the race, at the race start, and therefore get some excitement as they work their way through the field. Personally, I like that. I'm not necessarily one of these people that says we should always just put the fastest cars at the front, because if you do that, they are the fastest cars. What's going to happen? They're going to build a lead and disappear over time. Some will do it quicker than others, but that's what's going to happen. So I'm all for mixing it up, and I don't buy the idea that it's dangerous. I think Formula One drivers are skilled enough and will learn the skills of navigating through the field. It's just we're not used to doing that on a regular basis right now. So I'm kind of for it, definitely for experimenting with it in this year. John Roberts just says go for it. Hans Ketting says reverse racing can be nice if it's not too short. So the sprint race in itself could be a great spectacle. Now, one thing I do think on this is that qualifying as it is right now in our current format is not broken. So there's an argument to say, if it's not broken, don't try and fix it. I personally like to see cars going through one lap as fast as they possibly can, flat out qualifying. And under this proposal, we will still get that at one of the two back-to-back races. So we're not losing it at this stage. It's merely an experiment. I'd rather give ballast to the first race winners, says Alex7. This way there'll be infinite shenanigans with B and customer teams blocking. Well, you can argue that might be interesting, but probably if we're talking about not going with the heritage of Formula One, that definitely doesn't. Overtaking is a part of racing overall, says P. Catalunya Pedro. Absolutely, and we want to see more overtaking. That's what we all sort of crave, isn't it? More overtaking, more excitement on race day. And that's what I mean. If you put the fast cars at the front, the basic fundamentals of physics say you are likely to get less overtaking than if you put the faster cars at the back. We only do it this way because that's how we've always done it. Why not be open to something different? Let me show you the poll, because I think this is quite interesting in that the results that we got are not clear cut on this. So this is what I asked people earlier. Are you in favour of experimenting with reverse grid races to replace qualifying at back-to-back Grand Prix in 2020. So just for the one of those two races. And look at that. 55% say yes. Double headers are the perfect chance to try it out. 38% no, it's too contrived, it's fake, or it's dangerous, or it's simply just not F1. I thought, if I was really honest, that it would be far more obvious or far more clear-cut than that. That people would have a much clearer opinion. The fact that it's relatively close in that sense tells me that we should be trying it. This is an experiment. We don't know how it's going to go. And if it's that close, I'd love to see a similar poll done after we'd run an experiment like that and seen what the results are, and just see how many people might switch over to a new way of thinking on that. So I think it's really interesting that we're even talking about this. Personally, I think it's forward thinking. It's what Formula One should definitely be looking at. Whether we implement it or not is a whole other question altogether, but definitely looking to experiment, because we may not get another opportunity like we have in 2020. I think a reverse grid would cause too many incidents, which will lead to accidents at first corners in all races. Let's be honest, the drivers at the rear of the grids normally have less experience, says Kimberly Holder. Very true, but the point with all of this is that we're going to put the fastest cars at the back of the grid. They will be able to get past. They need to start to learn a bit of patience and a bit of racecraft in order to do that. It's not about blasting past at the first corner. We're highly likely to have a very similar end result that we would have at most other Grand Prix. But potentially we might have a lot more entertainment on the way to getting to it. I think that's the point with all this. I don't see it being dangerous. I see that it's another challenge that drivers and teams have to learn to navigate. Excuse me. Right, let's take one more of those. This year should be used for experiments, says Mr. Nyla 96. We are not going to get another opportunity like this. How often have we talked about potentially doing some experimental non-championship race at the end of a season? Just people talk about, fans talk about that. But it's never going to happen because it takes so much agreement from everybody, so much work. Well, 2020 is the time to try these things, so I'm up for that. Too many broken end plates, says Ren T. I don't see why it's any more dangerous than any other race start. You know, the drivers have to learn to be patient. That's what I feel. Right, let's move on to the next question. Now, let's see what I've got here. The next question comes from Harvey Howell. And he says, hang on, sorry, where's it gone? Harvey Howell says, with Williams possibly getting sold, who could you see buying it? Some rich guy or someone like BMW, or a new team like Panthera, Campos or HWA? Weird to think they were once so dominant. Let's talk Williams. No secret that Williams have struggled on the racetrack for the last few years, is it? That's results are a testament to that. I don't think it's a massive secret that financially they are one of the most, the biggest teams struggling, or the team struggling most on the Formula One grid. So perhaps it's no major surprise that they are openly admitting now they're looking for investment, possibly even a sale. The point that should be noted here is this isn't just the Williams F1 team. Williams are a group of companies who work both in Formula One but also across automotive and actually lots of other industries as well. They're a reasonable size group of companies that are very successful in what they do, but with their massive hit they've had in financial terms from the F1 side, with the automotive industry going through very tough times as well right now as well, their business, their group of companies has been hit massively. And this recent public showing that they are a public announcement that they are essentially up for sale is what the announcement says, perhaps doesn't come as a major surprise. It's very sad, of course, just like the announcement that McLaren were looking to offload a sizable number of staff across their group. It's a sign of probably things to come across the Formula One grid. Now, we can go into a debate about why Williams have struggled over time if you want. We can get into who's responsible for all of that. But the point is, these are a group of people with a huge passion for Formula One, a huge history, successful history. And it's a real shame that they found themselves in this situation. But the point of all of this is they found themselves in this situation probably because of what's happened in Formula One over the last few years, as much as anything they've done as an organisation themselves. Formula One's been precarious over the last few years, dominated by these huge manufacturers, which means the small independents are struggling, and it doesn't take much like a financial crash that we're going through and about to go through, probably get even deeper for some time, to tip them over the edge. So I'd love to see what you think about Williams. Who could end up buying it was the main question here from Harvey Howell. My first thoughts on that are that it certainly won't, or in my mind, it won't be somebody like a BMW. The reason it won't be a manufacturer is it makes no sense for an engine manufacturer or a car manufacturer to come into Formula One right now in a power unit era where it's well established. We've only got a few years left of that before we start looking at something massively different again, and they'd be playing catch up right up until we start changing the rules again. So you're not going to get a BMW come in and start developing a hybrid power unit in this last phase of these type of regulations. That's definitely not going to happen. But if somebody like a Williams is up for sale, and I'm talking about the F1 entry here, yes, you might find a small independent take it, but I think what's far more likely is somebody come in and keep the Williams name alive. There's too much history with that team, too much heritage, and as I said, the group of companies has huge potential. So what they need is an investor to come in and keep the thing going, you know, revamp the organisation, in my opinion. But I'd love to know what you think here. XR Bukowski, Toto Wolff could buy some Williams shares. Well, he had some. He sold them, didn't he? I mean, there are all sorts of stories about Toto Wolff and Aston Martin, Racing Point, now even Williams. Personally, I can't see that necessarily. I do think that Williams has the potential to be a great investment for somebody, but it's a big investment. Penske or Andretti says nominal times. Now, those kind of entries would be a reasonable shout, because those are organisations, or at least one of them, that have a lot of interest outside of racing as well as the racing itself. Something like that would be quite incredible, wouldn't it? If we want to bring American investment into Formula One and American drivers, American teams and talent, that would be amazing to see some American names on the grid. Rich Energy says Harash Shivalingai. Rich Energy I've seen pop up in a couple of tweets, and I mean, I hope they don't come back. I hope they don't. I hope for everybody at Williams' sake they don't get linked with that. Ron Dennis maybe, says Andrew Storm. Can't see Ron wanting to come back now. McLaren was his baby. I don't think anything else or anybody else would live up to his McLaren experience. Latifi's dad maybe, says Dylan Wheater. I mean, yes, Latifi already has a major stake in the organisation at McLaren. He already has an interest, of course, at Williams, and that may not be such a crazy shout. But the problem, as I keep saying, is that this isn't just buying an F1 entry. You know, this is much bigger than that, and you have to be fully invested in the whole Williams organisation, which is a great organisation, to be able to come in and take that over, I think. Penske Williams, yeah, JC, sounds good, doesn't it? Penske Williams. Pastor Maldonado, says Greg22. Well, it was the scene of his victory, wasn't it? He has history there. Captain Tom, Vascon 1. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Right, okay. Do you think Audi or Porsche, says Joel Santana? No, for the reasons I said. They're a manufacturer, and it simply makes no financial or competitive sense for an engine manufacturer like that to come in. They're not going to come in and take a Mercedes engine, and to come in and build their own power unit just makes no sense at all. So the next real opportunity for auto manufacturers to come in would be 2025, when we're looking to go to the next gen of power units. But maybe that Formula One starts to just move away from the automotive industry as backers, and maybe we get other organisations, other industries coming in to back a sort of much smaller Formula One than we've had in the past, given the changes we're going through right now. Interesting times. Bill Gates, says John Roberts. I'm not sure he'd be that interested, to be honest with you. Right, lots of engine manufacturers being suggested there. I just can't see it. Nike. Yeah, well, I mean, look, this is, I mean, you say Nike, and I laughed there. I don't think Nike are going to take over Williams, but I do think we could enter an era where a completely different industry comes in. If you think about when we had the tobacco industry in Formula One, they all left or forced to leave, and then we got kind of tech giants or communications giants come in, and then they moved on, and the automotive sector moved in. we had a big exodus at the end of 2008 of the automotive sector because of a financial crash. Now we're potentially going through one that's even bigger than that. And Formula One will be one of the things that automotive companies, organisations, will see as a way to slash costs if they need to. So I think we're in for some big changes over the short to medium term in Formula One, and of course long term as well. Let's go to the next question, which comes from Karma Strikes. Now, Karma Strikes says, not a quick question for you. F1 just made a rule change to the floor for next year. There's a picture, which I'll show you in just a moment. Given the affected area, do you think this will hurt Mercedes with their low rake system or Red Bull with their high rake? I think it's Red Bull, but I'd love to know your opinion. Right, let's have a look at the picture. This is what he's talking about. You may have missed some of this. Some of you last week, it was sort of snuck in with a raft of regulations that were ratified at the Motorsport World Council last week. Some quite interesting detail. The point of this change, you can see the top picture is what we have now. The bottom picture is what is coming next year. So this will be for 2021 with a tapered in floor at the rear section just ahead of the rear tyres. The point of this is to dump a load of downforce that the cars can produce, essentially slowing them down, for the reason that Pirelli want to be able to use this year's tyres, so the 2020 tyres, in 2021, because they don't want to develop something new, given that they were supposed to be using the 18-inch tyres in 2021 with the new regulations, of course. So what they've tried to do is shave a bit off the back of the floor there to essentially lose a load of downforce, slow the cars down, which means that by the end of next season, when the cars have gone through a whole season's worth of development, they won't be at a pace or a speed level that's too great for the tyres to be able to cope with. That's the theory behind it. So who's going to benefit more? Let's go back to the picture. Who's going to benefit more from that bottom picture there, the shaved rear end of the floor? Now the answer to that really is it's obviously not clear. The point is that currently with that top system, yes, probably Red Bull, not just because of their high rake system, but Red Bull generally are one of the greatest downforce producing cars on the grid. Part of that downforce on the Red Bull comes from that high rake concept, which uses the entire floor as an expansion chamber, if you like, underneath the car. From that very low point right at the front of the centre floor, where the airflow is accelerated through the tiny gap between the floor of the car and the floor of the racetrack. And then as the car tips up towards the back, the airflow or the air pressure expands out into that greater area right across the floor, and it effectively works as a much bigger, much more powerful diffuser. Now, clearly, with that full width floor at the back there, you can see that they have got greater potential to maximise that with what we have now. If you look at the bottom picture, that potential is reduced just simply because of the area of the floor being less great. However, what I would say is that whenever you have a change like this, and this is not an insignificant change to the design of the cars, the aero teams have an opportunity, and that opportunity is given to everybody up and down the grid. So whoever comes up with the best way of now working that new flow pattern, particularly around the rear wheels, has the opportunity to turn it into an advantage. Now, often when you have a big change like this, of course, it's the big teams with the biggest resources that have the opportunity to make the most of those changes. And that will then fall back to the likes of Red Bull and Mercedes and Ferrari, of course. But it offers an opportunity to everybody else on the grid. There's an opportunity for somebody to find a loophole or to find some new way of thinking about how that flow pattern moves inside the rear wheel and seals off the diffuser. So to answer your question, Karma Strikes on Twitter there, I don't know. My theory would say, yes, like you, it should potentially hurt Red Bull more, but who knows? Because it's going to be who develops that new way of thinking better than anyone else that's going to come out and find an advantage in that area. So we will have to wait and see. Shane Dunn says the ones with the most money. I mean, that's true. That's exactly what I mean. The bigger teams will have the better opportunity to deal with any change of regulations. Newey will sort it, says Lee Rainbow. He probably will, and that's another advantage that Red Bull have, is having Adrian Newey for opportunities like this. But it does. Somebody says there's an opportunity to do a brawn. That's kind of it. I mean, not as extreme as the brawn double diffuser year, of course. There's no opportunity like that. But this is a new way of thinking. And so we'll be getting into wind tunnels. They will be getting through their simulation programs and looking at what they can do, looking at with a blank sheet almost and saying, right, this is what we've got now. Forget what we had. This is what we've got. How can we maximise it? Right, says, why don't they just raise the tyre pressure to preserve the tyres? Well, I think that was the alternative, was to try and look at doing things like that would also slow the cars down. Because raising the tyre pressures is not what the teams want. The teams want the tyre pressures effectively as low as they can within limits, obviously. They're always looking to go lower and lower. Pirelli, when they need to shore up the tyres, or if they've got some concerns, will always raise the pressures to sort of firm them up and preserve them, as you say. That was the alternative to this, but it's not a great alternative because it really does offer it's a much bigger compromise, if you like, for the teams, in that this is an opportunity for teams to look in a new way of doing things, still offer them a development path over the season, which of course they will maximise, but hopefully reset them to a point that when they get to the end of that development path, they'll be somewhere near the limit or just inside that limit that the tyres are capable of managing. That's the theory behind it. Right, let's move on to the next one, because the next question is this one from Monster Matty. And again, it's talking about the aero changes. This one talking about the sliding scale of aero development, because he says, with that coming in and the new budget cap, which do you think is more enticing for potential new teams? I think the chance to develop a car more quickly and to compete for a larger slice of the prize money has real promise, from Monster Matty there. So which is more beneficial to a new team coming in? I actually disagree with you there, Monster Matty. Not in that I don't think that's a great thing. I think both of these rules, actually, incidentally, are great rules. But I think the budget cap is the one that's most attractive to a new team. And the reason I say that is because what's very easy to do when you come in as a new entrant in Formula One, you have a budget in mind, don't you, as to what you think you're going to be able to compete for. But the reality can hit you very quickly that on some seasons, you may be in a championship fight or a fight with your nearest rivals that could be valuable in terms of points and prize money. But to get across the line in that, to stay in that fight, you might need to inject more money. The budget cap means that a team, a new team or any team, will have an absolute ceiling on what they can spend. And that's, from a business perspective, is a really strong, valuable tool, and will stop some of those people coming in and feeling under pressure, feeling forced to overspend to either compete or simply stay in the sport. The sliding scale of aero development, which I also love, by the way, which I think is a really great addition to the rules, offers those teams that can't go above that budget cap, of course, offers them the chance to compete, despite spending, not to spend more money, but just to compete in comparison to the bigger teams who've been successful the year before. So I think in terms of allowing the field to close up, it's a really strong move. And there's another question on that one as well, and I'm going to switch to it quickly now because it comes from Ben Guest, who says, do you see the new sliding aero rules as a permanent solution? He says, I understand the short-term need for back markers to catch up, but it feels wrong to keep the regs in place for long-term. Doesn't it also put extra strain on the now capped budget of those teams? So let's deal with the last bit. It doesn't really put extra strain on the budgets, because the reason I say that is that every team, even with a set budget cap, if you had a set amount of money to spend, which they will all have next year, or a maximum, of course, they would all love to be able to put more and more of that into aero development. That's where most gain is made. That's where most advantage can be found in current Formula One. But they can't do that under this sliding scale of aero development. The most successful teams, even if they wanted to put 90% of their budget into aero development, they can't, because they're going to be limited on the amount of time they can spend in a wind tunnel and the amount of computing power they can put into their CFD programs. The teams at the back of the grid, who still have the same budget, or the same potential budget at least, would love to put 90% of that into aero development if they could. Well, they will have an opportunity to get much closer to that. offering them more scope to potentially move up the field. It's not going to be at the massive detriment to something else on their in their program, because they'll have to cut it back from something that's less that has less possibility of providing gain. And aero is the one thing in Formula One that offers the most potential benefit if you can put money into it and time into it and resource into it. And that's what this new rule does for those teams, is give them the opportunity to put more of their resource, of their capped resource, into the area that will offer more return on the racetrack. So personally, I think it's a really great addition. Could it be long term? I don't know. I mean, the point is, we're doing this because there's such a spread up and down the grid of performance. If we get to a point at somewhere down the line where performance is really quite close and equalised and the racing's great and maybe we don't need it, well then maybe we don't need it. But I think at that point we look at it again. Right now we kind of do need it, and I think this is a really good solution to the troubles that we're facing right now. Let's see what you think. It would make sense for F1 to look into hydrogen. We'll get to that later, but perhaps I think they are looking into hydrogen combustion as a power propulsion unit. I like the new aero rule, says Alex Cooper. Good idea, hope it works as intended. Couldn't agree more. Maybe every team will just focus on engines now. No, that's Christopher Brown. No, they won't, because aero still offers huge opportunity. And, you know, they'll focus on engines. The engine manufacturer will focus on engines, as they always do. The teams can only really focus on aero. That's their area for finding opportunity and advantage, is aero development. So they will always continue to focus on that up to the limits that the rules now allow them to. What happens if a team goes over the cap, says Lost and Confused. All right, there's a good point. So how is this going to be policed? Lots of people have asked me. Now, the truth is that we already have a system like this. There's already limits on how much wind tunnel time every Formula One team can use, and how much CFD computing power can be used in aero development as well. That already exists, has done for a few years. It's just that at the moment everyone has exactly the same limits. Now that's policed by the teams having to keep very detailed official logs of their usage and submit them on a regular basis to the FIA, who have a department that monitors this thing. That department also has the ability to come in and do random spot checks whenever they want at any Formula One team, and that happens. So that's how it's policed. Now you could say, well, surely they can fiddle the logs. I mean, they could do if they really wanted to, and I'm not saying no one's done that, but the reality is that the consequences of getting found out for doing that are far greater than the benefit you would have for doing that. You'd have to do some massive amount of overspending in terms of your time to see a tangible advantage, and find some way of keeping that secret, which is not easy, because you only need one disgruntled staff member. You only need a spot check to come in and find that the official data logger that the FIA have placed at your factory shows a different log to the one that you're submitting, and you're busted, and the consequences would be serious. So it's kind of self-policing. And that's how it's going to be with these new rules as well, a very similar way of doing things. I imagine, because we've got new rules like this, the teams will, or the FIA rather, may look at it even more stringently, may look at doing more spot checks, that kind of thing. But I think it's going to be very similar to things like the financial cap. It's going to be very much self-policing. It's going to take a couple of seasons probably to shake itself out and find the best solution. And maybe we have to tweak the rules and the way we police it over time. But the truth is, it can work. I see it working. I don't see it being a major issue of teams trying to fiddle the books in that sense. But we will see. Okay, let me see. Could teams use the aero screen instead of the halo? Surely that's more aerodynamic. Andy Nixon. Well, different subject, but they could if the FIA decide that's the safety device they want to go with. They looked at it. When they were looking at the halo, decided to go with the halo. That's what we've got. I'm not sure the halo is a problem for many people anymore. Let's see. What about to lower staff members' salaries and give them a sponsor contract to compensate, says Hans Kettling. So I guess you're talking about to get around the budget cap. There's loads of ways that teams could, in theory, fiddle the budget cap. I mean, anyone who's who's ever done any kind of clever accountancy, even at the very simplest level, knows there are little ways and tricks around everything. And at the grand scale we're talking about, where hundreds of millions of dollars are involved, of course you could do that. But I think it's such a risk. If you get found out, you will be excluded from the championship. They've already said that. And I think that's a threat, particularly in modern Formula One, where it's so corporate. Many of these teams are representing huge brands and massive automotive giant companies. And of course, you can look at other incidents that massive automotives have let themselves down massively. And I know that happens. But I just don't see it being a major issue. And if it does become an issue, we'll have to deal with it. But in the beginning, this is how we're going to police it. And I think we have to trust and see how it goes and tweak it as necessary over the next couple of years. Maybe Red Bull can let Honda run CFD, for example, says Pine to Pine 3. Now that's another good point. Could teams with sister teams or with customer teams farm out some of their CFD? The problem we will have in that situation is when you come to something like the Racing Point situation, where they have a very similar car. Now I know it's a similar car to last year's Mercedes and not the current Mercedes, but if we get to a point where we've got teams running a car that's very similar in many ways to what our parent team is running, perhaps some of that CFD could be shared or could be passed on or could be done in conjunction with each other. And that's something that the teams are very much aware of and are trying to find ways to make sure the wording prevents that in the regs, prevents that from happening. But that's a very valid point, in that that's the worry for some of these organisations, is that if you don't have a sister team, or if you don't have a customer team, could you be left at some sort of disadvantage where you may not have the opportunity to sort of bend the rules in that way? So it's definitely something that's being looked at, and we don't really have a firm answer on that yet, but it's something that's being discussed among the teams right now. I wonder what Flavio Briatore would have done with these new cost cap regs. Would have been surprising. Well, perhaps we best not go into that. Even with higher powered engine aero, is it transferred to the track? Andrew Leese. Even with higher powered engine aero as it is transferred. Sorry, I'm not sure what that one means. Let's see, what else have we got? Mark, could teams run simulations on the cloud? Says Obina Ehirim. They already do. That already happens, and that's also part of the logging process. So yes, that happens, and that's not a way of getting around the aero research that we're talking about. So it's already very much in existence. The cloud is very much part of everything that Formula One teams use. How do mechanics and engineers change the way they work when a junior or inexperienced driver's in the car? Says Max Bolts. Well, that's quite a good question. Very off topic, but let's go with it. Well, you have to treat them very differently, in all honesty. And what happens is you end up, the experience often at that point falls to the team over and above the driver. So when you get a new rookie driver in, he may be very quick in a racing car, but have no experience of Formula One, certainly of a Formula One car, of developing a Formula One car. That's when the engineering team and the mechanics and their experience, the driver has to lean on them. And what you often find is over the course of the first 6 months or the first season, the driver starts to gain confidence when you start to go through these programs and race weekends and things start to develop in the way that he was perhaps hoping. And that's when at some stage you get a driver sort of click and mature, if you like, grow up. And that's when they start leading those conversations more about engineering, and the two work together. But when you have a rookie, the engineers and the mechanics have to very much lead the way. They have to make sure that they take away everything that a driver could be worrying about at that point. Simplify everything so that he can focus on the bit he does know, which is driving the car. But decent question. Let's see. Mark, can the teams not just make their own unknown black budget for testing and development? Says Killer. I mean, yes, that's another one of these things. There's so many loopholes and so many ways of clever accounting. They will all be questions that come up. And I'm sure all of the teams are asking each other those questions right now. I'm sure they're all asking the most experienced accountants in the world how they could get around these things. The FIA have also employed or contracted a set of hugely experienced accountants to run the policing side of things as well. So there will be a battleground. It will be, like everything else, it will become an area where teams are looking for a loophole or looking for a way to find advantage. That's the same with every regulation that covers Formula One. So that's what I mean by it's going to take a bit of time to settle down. Ferrari using IndyCar data in F1. So there's been talk of Ferrari perhaps going to play in IndyCar if they have to cut staff and are looking for ways to redeploy those staff. Could they go and work in IndyCar? They could do. I don't think it offers much value to Formula One. But yes, there's another one of these things. If you're a car manufacturer, could you use your own CFD systems in the automotive sense to run some tests or some sims that might benefit your Formula One team? So many ways that could potentially be used to get around this. What do you think? What do you think of bringing back the 3ED car? The third car in practice for slower teams, X603X. So yeah, we used to have a third car, didn't we? We used to have a T car first of all, but we used to occasionally run a third car in practice. I don't think it's worth it. I think first of all you've got to bring 3 cars, which brings massive expense with it. It does offer an opportunity for another driver to get some track time, but I just think the logistics of that, finding a garage big enough, the expense of actually operating 3 cars on a race weekend probably negates the point of the smaller teams struggling like that. So not the one for me, I don't think. If you had your own F1 team, what would you call it? Dave the Fish. Oh God. Come back to me on that one. Any suggestions welcome. Will XJR, happy birthday Ron Dennis. Yeah, happy birthday to Big Ron. I hope he's enjoying himself wherever he is. Right, what time is it? 9:45. Let's do one more and then we will have to probably wrap it up. Let's see, what have I got? Have I got another question here? I have. It comes from Rohan B. Nair. He says, what do you think about Adrian Newey and his way of approach for the Formula One team? Well, that's an easy one to answer. I'm a massive fan of Adrian. I think in terms of his approach to Formula One designing, he is second to none. He is meticulous, he is single-minded, focused, dedicated, unmovable in his desire to find the perfect Formula One car. But that's also part of his downfall. That's also what makes him very difficult to work with on some occasions, because he's so single-minded that sometimes his idea may not be the right idea, but he thinks it is, and he'll just go with his belief. And because he's in charge and he's got this experience, he tends to just go with it. The MP418 at McLaren was one of those moments where he firmly believed in his ideas so much, and they weren't terrible ideas by any stretch, but he firmly believed in them so much that we weren't able to get them working. It didn't prove to be successful, and it cost us a huge amount of money and probably 2 seasons worth of poor cars for us to realise that. So he's both brilliant and frustrating for some other members of the team, but I have absolute respect for Adrian Newey because he was almost the embodiment of what Formula One should be, searching for perfection with every single thing that he does, and that's why I love him. Right, Team Elvis has entered the championship. Right, I think we better wrap it up there because it's 9:45. Wilson and Farrell F1 Racing, says Jonathan Moore. Those are my dogs, if you don't know. Right, let's wrap it up. I just want to say a huge thank you for bearing with me again and coming back, given all the tech issues. I still don't know what the sound issue is with that mic, because did a test earlier today. It works perfectly. So I'll try and get to the bottom of that. But either way, we've got a laptop mic that seems to be working okay. So at least you can hear me and see me this week, which was a step up from some moments previously. So thank you so much for coming back. Thanks for all the questions you've sent in. Do keep them coming because I'll try and answer them over the course of the week. And I'll be back very soon with something else. Have a good evening, folks. I'll see you soon. Ta-da!